Question 10. Determine the following infinite limits. So first one, limit x is approaching 1. Okay, 1 over 1 minus x squared. Okay, so here you can just do the analysis. When x is approaching 1 from the left-hand side, which means what? Which means your x is approaching 1, but your x is always smaller than 1, right? This just means your x is approaching 1, but your x is always smaller than 1. Okay, this is true. So what about your x squared? Right, your x is approaching 1, and x is always smaller than 1. That means x is like 0.999999, right? Something like that. So your x squared, it's also approaching 1, right? But it's also slightly smaller than 1. Okay. Now what about your 1 minus x squared? So just imagine your x squared is like 0.999, right? So your 1 minus x squared, it's approaching 0. Okay, it is approaching 0, but it's always slightly greater than 0. Okay, only because your x squared, right, it's like 0.999. So your 1 minus x squared, it's always slightly greater than 0. It's like 0.001 something. Okay, as it's approaching 0, but it's always slightly greater than 0. So that's why this entire bottom part is approaching 0, but it's always slightly greater than 0. So this ratio is approaching positive infinity. Okay, this ratio is approaching positive infinity. So part B. Part B, very similar steps. Okay, x over 1 minus square root of x. So now x is approaching 1 plus, which means x is approaching 1, but x is always slightly greater than 1. Okay. Then what about square root of x? Square root of x is also approaching 1, but always slightly greater than 1. Okay. And now your 1 minus square root of x. Okay, because your square root of x is like 0.999 something. Right? So your 1 minus square root of x is always approaching 0, but always slightly greater than 0. Sorry. Yes. Sorry. It's slightly smaller than 0. Okay, just now I made a mistake. Because square root of x is approaching 1 from the right-hand side. So this value is like 1.0001, something like that. Okay, so your 1 minus that 1.001 something. It's closer and closer to 0, but it's always a negative number. Okay, so that's why it's approaching 0, but it's always slightly smaller than 0. So the bottom part is always slightly smaller than 0. Your top part, okay, it's always approaching 1. So it doesn't matter, it's like 1.001 or 0. It's 1.001. It doesn't matter. Over something approaching 0, but always slightly smaller than 0. Okay, as you can imagine, the number is closer and closer to a very negative number. Okay, so that's why the result is negative infinity.